Well, I want to use our time well here. I think what we'll do is a little bit of a combination of a little bit of sharing and setting the situation and some of the exciting work that's happening through sustainable design and working at larger levels of systemic transformation. And then I thought we would take one, after kind of getting into a couple examples, take one that Buck is working on and begin to actually craft something with him that could be for a whole region, you know, in terms of moving towards a sustainable region. So if that sounds okay to you, then what I think I'll do is share a little bit and then invite Buck to share some context to the situation here, and then we'll go through and begin to you know, just almost like I would do with any region, start to design a way to approach an appreciative inquiry design kind of summit in the sustainability domain. Okay, so I think we'll get real practical, and I'd love to see something come out of this. So. Yeah, so I'm faculty chair of the Fowler Center for Sustainable Value at Case Western Reserve, and what we're noticing is that one of the most important awakenings happening around the world is this desire to create a sustainable economy and ecology, sustainable communities, sustainable organizations, and the real question is, how do you go about doing that? There's no question in my mind that the language of sustainability, you know, obviously has many definitions and many different concepts behind it, but there's an urge. I think Paul Hawken wrote a book called Blessed Unrest, and he says this urge to create a sustainable world in harmony with the planet, an economy that serves people and society and helps build a flourishing nature, that is one of the largest urges in human history, and it's bubbling up everywhere. He calls it blessed unrest. And I see the same thing happening in the business world in particular. Obviously, we know it's happening at the grassroots and in communities and so on, but I see it happening in the economy in such a strong way. I think it's the biggest thing to come into the field of management and leadership in, you know, the last 30 years, quite honestly. And it's an innovation engine. It's an invitation to spark people's imagination, to invite people into a much higher, more passionate level of engagement within their organizations. I shared a little story of some, you know, we've gathered 3,000 stories of business as a force for peace in high conflict zones, and business and for the eradication of extreme poverty, business and ecological innovation, and so on. And it is very exciting, like this company in the Netherlands called OAT, that you know, they said, how do we create now a whole product line and a service where we design gym shoes that are going to appeal to young people, but it's all based on sustainable materials, it's all built in sustainable renewable energy factories, that after it's done it doesn't go into a landfill, but you can actually go and it becomes a regenerative force in balance with nature. You can go to your backyard and plant the gym shoe when it's done, and it biodegrades very rapidly and turns into a tree. And so there's just, you know, it's happening so quickly around the world. Factories being designed that give back more energy to the world than they use. For example, the SC Johnson factory in Wisconsin, you know, they were looking at the relationship of waste and so on, and so they built methane from the waste dump to the factory that creates enough energy to power their facilities, but then they produce more than they need and they give it back to the community. And the goodwill in that community is just enormous. So, you know, we're at a stage in our planetary history where the challenges are grand challenges. So, for example, a grand challenge, how do we, within the next 25 years, some say that's going to be too late, how do we transition to a completely off our fossil fuel economy to a completely renewable energy economy? Well, you know, how you put that in your mind. You're a change agent. How do you help the world make that transition? Well, obviously, You know, it's going to be at all different levels. It's going to be at one individual consciousness at a time, one school at a time, one factory at a time, one community at a time, one system at a time, and so on, until the whole world begins to move in this sustainability kind of direction. But my special interest is how to bring appreciative inquiry to accelerate these things and the instincts that people have around that. Now, some of you have heard me talk about, well, appreciative inquiry just as a quick way to get into it. To appreciate means to value. It means to inquire into what gives life to living systems, when living human and natural systems when they're most alive. And you know, in other terms, in management terms, we could call it a strength-based approach to leadership and inquiry. So, for example, when I was sharing tons of stories with Peter Drucker about appreciative inquiry shortly before he passed away, he said, "Oh, David, well, I wrote about this kind of concept many years ago. You know, the task of leadership is," and I said, "Well, tell me, you know, I'll put it in a nutshell." And he said, "It's easy. The task of leadership is to create an alignment of strengths in ways that make a system's weaknesses irrelevant." And he wrote that down. You know, the task of leadership is to create this alignment of strengths in ways that make a system's weaknesses irrelevant. And what that means is, if you take that seriously, it means, could leading change be all about strengths? Seeing strengths, elevating strengths, creating combinations of strengths, combination effects of strengths, and so on. And so in one of my recent papers, I talk about what I'll call the 3 circles of this strengths revolution in the field of management. And the first circle is all about the ways of knowing, ways of knowing and ways of elevating human strengths. The ways, as a father, to come home and see everything that is new and stirring and all the new interests in my daughter, for example. Can I wake up my appreciative eye and help elevate the new stirrings, what's giving life to my daughter, the new strengths that I might have not noticed if I was lazy and I was just using the eye from a month ago, but what new is happening, what new interests? So there's a lot of tools emerging. I'm going to put the spirit of appreciative inquiry in the center here, the spirit of inquiry, because, you know, to elevate strengths, you need to be able to have tools and methods for seeing those strengths, for helping to lift them up. You need languages of strengths. So, for example, there is a lot of new great language and tools, like the VIA character strengths. You know, we have this diagnostic manual of mental illness with all the deficit-based terms for human being. Well, now we have from Marty Seligman and Chris Peterson, an encyclopedia of human strengths, and it gives a rich vocabulary of human strengths around courage and love and temperance and social intelligence and compassion, and it gives a really powerful language set. Well, that helps us to elevate strengths and so on. So the second circle is all around creating connections and combinations of strengths. You know, learning, having the tools with the appreciative processes and others to create configurations of strengths. You know, that Drucker notion to create alignment so strong that it makes the weaknesses irrelevant. Well, what are those tools for creating concentration effects of strengths, for creating combination effects of strengths, and so on? One of those tools is the Appreciative Inquiry Summit method, you know, where we bring anywhere between 300 to 1,000 people. We've done 8,000 people before, bringing the strengths of a whole city together to design the future of the city, bringing the strengths of a whole trucking company with dock worker, with CEO, with customers in the room. So there's methods that are emerging for macro level concentrations of collaborations that tap into the universe of strengths. You know, one of the kind of shifts in appreciative inquiry is the shift at a basic level of metaphor. You know, the world isn't so much a problem to be solved. It's a universe of strengths. That life on this planet is filled with this kind of abundance. And so if I'm a manager at a trucking company, you know, and we're having, well, I can just get on the phone with Boeing if I have the right relationships, and we have access to those strengths. So what this second circle talks about is creating these concentration effects and tapping into the universe of strengths. And then the third is where we build institutions, and I call it positive institutions, institutions that not only elevate our highest human strengths and capacities and stories and rich resources for building the future, not only elevate all of that stuff, not only know how to magnify it within its own boundaries and create concentration effects and planning methods with 300 to 500 people in the room that bring every level and every silo and so on, but now the design of positive institutions that bring those higher human strengths into society on a consistent basis. So we start thinking of institutions as vehicles for the magnification of compassion, institutions as vehicles for the magnification of human courage, any set of those kind of human strengths. The sense, you know, institutions as vehicles for bringing more love and intergenerational concern into the world. And I think that's where this sustainability agenda is a rife overlap, where people are honestly, I think, aching to create institutions that are in balance with our human systems, that are actually helping to create a nature that's flourishing again. Like people in that company that created this concept of shoes that bloom. Guess how they feel about that? They are proud. They feel on fire. They want to do more of it. You know, they get letters from all over the world about this is the vision that I have of business and so on. And so anyway, I'm increasingly intrigued by how is it now that we go about dealing with these systemic level issues of collective action that are so hard to accomplish. You know, think about this transition. Jeremy Rifkin calls it towards a third industrial revolution. Every major age and industrial age kind of emerges with a combination of things, a combination of some kind of new energy form, like the steam engine and coal and so on, and then some kind of new communication form, like the typing.